Hello and welcome back. How have you been out there in the real world? Spring's around the corner and I'm looking forward to warmer weather. Today, I'll be reviewing American Pilgrim by Roosh. You may have heard of him, you may have not, but just like I do with these book reviews, I encourage you to draw your own conclusions. It's likely this is one of those kind of books that may not be for everybody, and that's okay. I first heard about Roosh sometime around 2017/2018. I forget. Back then I was in this darker place in my life where I struggled with a real sense of meaning and direction. I was working in a field I really didn't belong in, unhappy and unfulfilled. But I kept working there because at least it was enough to provide a source of income where I could pursue things I thought would keep me happy as a man, someone living in the city machine. Turns out this sort of situation was more common than one may think. I was getting to the point where drinking beer, going out to bars, dating women, the whole thing was getting tiresome, expensive, and stale. There was something toxic to it all. I was getting a sense that all these things I thought I was supposed to pursue to be cool was equivalent to providing enough of a satisfaction to offset and otherwise keep me from what I should be doing, applying real changes in my life for something better. These things were slowly corrupting me. It was like a steady decay of my soul that I kept feeding with a bunch of vices, thinking it would just take care of itself. Somehow, it was deeply depressing, and slowly I started to crawl out of this black ooze that is modernity. It wasn't easy, but voices like Roosh helped get me out. It was because I could relate to him and what he went through. He spoke about similar things. This was someone who became a sort of controversial figure for discussing things like applying game in order to sleep with women. He was celebrated for it, enjoyed a bit of internet fame, wrote successful books on it, and he also realized that there had to be more to life than just these sort of trivial pursuits. The drinking, the drugs, which is a common vice to get into, and these fickle, short-term relationships. Years would pass, and I believe a significant occurrence happened to Roosh that really propelled him towards looking into a more spiritual meaning for life. I've always been spiritual, but the vices were like poisonous vines thickly wrapped around it, and it was suffocating. It may sound cliche, but for Roosh, he searched for that meaning and found it in Christ. He's since more serene and dedicated with his pursuits that involve the transition towards serving Him rather than the self-indulgence the world is eager to offer you and corrupt you with. There is a lesson of just because you can doesn't mean you should here. This book is about these details, and if you're someone who's been through similar and you're finding out that chasing one-night stands or short-term online dating affairs, drugs, alcohol, all these things we're inundated with, if you become things like numb, nihilistic, or resentful, this book is for you. There's a way out. Lift the curtain and look past it because these things do not offer the kind of meaning you're looking for. It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty, plenty of it, but not something you want to drink to satiate your thirst. It has to do with eating all this candy when you really crave something wholesome that nourishes not just your body, but your soul. These things matter, and pretending or ignoring them is something that you do at your own peril. But enough about that. Let's get into the book review. American Pilgrim by Roosh came out on February 16, 2021. I ordered it right away, and I received it just 2 days later via Amazon. As soon as it arrived, I immediately put it on top priority in my rotation and quickly devoured the content, reading it across several lunch breaks and early weekend mornings. The book is just under 400 pages. It's at 395 pages, and it's a fairly quick read. The book is made up of an introduction, 23 chapters based off of a certain topic, like birds. Roosh has become an avid bird watcher enthusiast, demons, and country. An epilogue and an appendix in which he discusses what he's learned about live speech. Each chapter provides a story and insight into the topic as related to him and his experiences. He toured the country fairly recently, giving speeches, and it's one of the main undercurrents throughout the book. I like to share some parts of the book I found especially relatable. The first one is in chapter 3, called Garden. I was starting to understand how the oligarchs feed a tailor-made propaganda program to each socioeconomic class. The poor blacks get hip-hop, Nike shoes, junk food, and fashion brands produced in China. The poor whites get opioids, alcohol, and junk food. The middle-class whites get sodomy, casual sex, racism, and equality. The upper middle-class whites get hyper-materialism in the form of luxury cars, boats, Ivy League universities, leisure wear, and real estate. Every group is given a program that will render it harmless to the state, both politically and demographically. In chapter 4, Christians, he shares some great insight regarding the Amish and the Mennonites. Roosh writes, "Once you get past their peculiar outfits and way of living, the Amish and Mennonites are simply devout Christians. They are honest people who work hard. Their communities are strong, their families are growing, and they don't commit crimes at nearly the level of outsiders. The entire country should have their ethos, and yet it's more common for others to make fun of them. They will continue to be seen as fringe and weird by people who stare at their smartphones for 6 hours a day and live alone in their urban apartment box, for which they overpay so that they can have access to the coolest bars and restaurants in the city." In chapter 5, called Guidance, there's a part on bars that I was able to relate to. After dinner, we walked outside and were greeted by a bustling night scene. There were at least 5 bars within a stone's throw and dozens more in the city proper. I couldn't help but wonder, how many bars do people need? 1,000,000 bars for 1,000,000 micro-identities to drink micro-brews with funny-sounding names while on their way to entering micro-sexual relationships with a member of the opposite sex or same sex? And in order to cater to the needs of your micro-identity, you need to live alongside others in expensive micro-boxes. You become a rat that needs to live with other rats. Sounds familiar. In chapter 7, called Lust, I was also able to relate to the following. Roosh writes, "My previous work encouraged men to go to venues like this." He's referring to bars and nightclubs. "I taught them that they would feel strong and masculine by having one-night stands with women, whereas the type of pleasure-seeking I promoted was more in line with effeminacy and a lack of self-control." Chapter 12 also stood out. It's called Temptation, and here's the following. There was actually 2 prominent passages that stood out for me in particular. Roosh writes, "I started to wonder whether I was serving up a plate of despondency to my followers." He's speaking to a priest here, and he has a following conversation. Father Ash tells him, "Be careful," he added, "about becoming despondent at what you're seeing. Despondency is a tool of the devil. He wants you to believe that nothing can be done and evil will only get worse. Anything that causes you to lose faith or see yourself or the world as irredeemable must be corrected. That's the wrong path." The second one, I believe many people will relate to. Passage goes like this. "I decided to be hip for a moment by walking into a crowded cafe named Ritual Coffee Roasters. When I see the word ritual in a neighborhood full of gay pride flags, I think of satanic rituals, but no way could it be that. I looked at the menu and noticed their logo, an arc and a star against a red background. I immediately thought of the Soviet Union's hammer and sickle insignia. I tried to ignore this association and proceeded to wait in line. I looked around and saw a mostly homosexual clientele using Apple devices. I began to feel like I was in a doctor's waiting room of people awaiting the results of an HIV test. I left without placing an order. I would later find out that the owners did indeed receive inspiration for their logo from the sickle and hammer on the flag of the Soviet Union. Real edgy to use a political system that killed over 20 million people as inspiration for your hipster coffee shop in a capitalistic country. Did they serve organic fair trade coffee in the gulags? Maybe they should research that. Chapter 13, called Decline, was also highly relatable for me. Roosh writes, "The three of us had 0 children, the typical outcome for first-generation Americans. Our parents did not understand that the new country they moved to for opportunity and comfort would render us sterile. We had to learn how to live in the new world. But all we had really learned was how to remain in a state of suspended adolescence, chasing daily pleasures while postponing commitment and obligation, and I had pursued those pleasures more excessively than them. Our parents came here, had us, and that was that. An Armenian lineage terminated. The only purpose of it all was to have a higher standard of living, but the cost was the death of the family name. While I'm not going to use the preservation of my line as a motivation to rush into marriage, it's hard not to lament that evil is winning. Our ancestors overcame numerous tragedies in the past to maintain their families, most recently the Armenian genocide, but we couldn't overcome pornography and casual sex." Chapter 21, called Country, I believe is a fair summary of a certain state of things in which I believe many men right now can relate to. Roosh writes, "I traveled north to Americus, Georgia. Its founder, John Americus Smith, bought some land and started a cotton plantation. The ensuing economic success helped to create the town. I imagine that many cities and counties were started by men who took a chance and made it work. It strikes me that these men started entire towns when they had been younger than me, whereas I have been barely able to start my own life. Here I was at 40 without a permanent home or a family of my own." He elaborates, "And when I look at my rootless peers, many are in the same boat. We never matured. We remained like children crying out for our daily dose of candy in the form of fun, cars, sex, status, or toys. While thinking we were free, we were slaves to pleasure. And instead of harnessing our will to create for the common good, we harnessed it to sleep with more women, to lift weights to become more sexually attractive, or to work in jobs for money that steeped us further into sin." Chapter 22 will be my final reference. It's called Apostasy, and I think it does a great job of articulating the post-modern rat race that was pre-COVID, the kind of normalcy that people are so eager to return to. Roosh writes, "That is the big scam of life in the United States. First, you're pushed into a university to get a degree that settles you with a high amount of debt, but which gives you only a narrow range of skills. After you graduate, who is going to employ you for those skills? A corporation in the city, and that city will have a metropolitan population of 1 million or more. Then you go into the city with your new job ready to start your new life, but you'll succumb to temptation. You'll drink, fornicate, experiment with drugs, and to alleviate the drudgery of your job and commute, you become addicted to entertainment or anything else in this world that can provide you with temporary joy. You're not saving as much money as you thought you would, and the interest on your student loans is so high that it will take you more than 10 years to pay off. A decade passes. More of your money must be spent on things that give you pleasure. Now you're addicted to the city, barely able to save, with a host of addictions that you didn't have before. If you're lucky, and I mean really lucky, you'll find a suitable woman to marry, but she's going to be your reflection, a woman attached to the city and its pleasures. Well, that's going to do it for this book review. I give it a solid 10 out of 10. It's entirely based and red-pilled. I can't stress enough that if you've fallen for these evil tricks, lies, deceit, you're not alone and you can get out of it. But you're gonna need help. You can't do it alone as a man. It's been written that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, spiritual wickedness, in high places. If you struggled against these things or are struggling with them, now you're gonna need to put on the armor of God. Something the mainstream doesn't want to talk about, but instead ridicule at every opportunity. It's going to take dedication, discipline, and hard work at keeping maintenance. But through these things, you may end up finding the kind of meaning you've been searching for. The kind of meaning that things like Netflix, casual sex, and drugs cannot satiate you with. Thanks again. I hope you check it out. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to my channel for more content, and I will see you guys next time.